Alright, welcome back one more time. Our final new topic for this week is full screen dialogues. Now, full screen dialogues are going to be pretty similar to the stuff you've dealt with in the past. On the screen here, I've got the material design specification up for those so we can talk about them. The reason we want to talk about full screen dialogue here is it's the appropriate UI piece to use for, say, for example, creating a user or a course or whatever for your homework assignment. Because a full screen dialogue is a dialogue that takes up the entire screen when the user is creating or giving us a series of related pieces of information that all go together as part of a whole. For example, you can see a sample of a full screen dialogue right here. In fact, if I resume the animation, you'll see when the user clicks new on a calendar event, they get something like this. That full screen dialogue allows them now to see all of the information for creating an event in their calendar. They can save it or they can close it. They give it names and locations, dates and times, all of those pieces. Everything that's necessary there, a full screen dialogue is that appropriate piece to put into place. A couple of things which where we use a full screen dialogue is, for example, when we require keyboard input, such as filling out a form, or in our case, that's what you're doing, right? Or if it may open additional dialogues, okay? A full screen dialogue like this is the only type of dialogue that we allow other dialogues to open on top of them. There's a couple of important things, though. First off, if we look at the anatomy of the dialogue itself, when we're looking at the action, don't use something like the word close because the user doesn't know they're in a dialog box. They don't know what they're doing. Rather, it should be something like save or send or share, create, update. Whatever action defines the positive behavior that you're going to have take place here, we would do that. So for example, and likewise, on this button over here on the left, we always use an X to close it. Don't use anything like an up arrow or the back arrow or other things like that, because those provide indication to the user. Is what this is when they see an X, though, is it tells them this is about to be abandoned. And likewise, we don't want to make titles that are too huge because then it distracts from everything. We want to be clean and simple. But a full screen dialogue, as you can see here, allows us to easily give the user a behavior in both the affirmative and the negative, a title, and then whatever other information needs to take place for that. That's what we want to try to implement now is on a simpler scale in this particular application, a full screen dialogue. So let's go ahead and do that. We want to come in here and we're going to create a new class here. Let's call this, I'm going to call my new user dialog fragment that extends, superclass is dialog fragment. Making sure again to as always pick the support version of dialog fragment. Go ahead and press OK. So we get our dialog fragment in here. The whole idea behind this dialog fragment, though, for us is to allow us to have a place for the user to enter in some basic pieces. So in our little sample here, I want the user to be able to enter in a first name, a last name, and an email address. Because that's what we're going to show in our recycler view. So I'm going to have a, private. We want a text input, edit text to allow us to put out those things. I'm going to do first, EDT. I spelled that wrong the first time. That's funny. EDT. First, EDT, last, and EDT email. Okay. These pieces will allow us to store the field, access the fields for the first name, the last name, and the email that we're going to need to work with. We're going to also want to come in and create now a layout. Again, you'll notice rather than doing as I've done in the past, go in and create a fragment and change those pieces, I'm showing you another way to do it. Once you know what you're doing, sometimes it's rather than coming in and choosing new fragment and having it build it all, it's a little bit easier sometimes to just build the class and the XML file that you need to work with. Oops, hold on. because especially in this case, we're going to want to have our layout file be a little bit more advanced. So I'm going to call this dialog. Oops, sorry. Well, no, we can go with dialog. I like that. Let's do dialog. New user. Root of constraint layout. But the thing that's going to set now this dialog apart from all other dialogs is this guy right here. Okay, we need to have an app bar. Most of our dialogues so far were modal little windows where you could still see the toolbar or action bar underneath. So we need to have one of those inside of our layout. So we're going to want to drop in a couple of important pieces for us. We want an app bar layout. Okay, and there's a couple of different types of app bar layouts. You can have a collapsing toolbar, which would be useful in a different type of action. We don't want that. It doesn't really need to have an image for the background. We're not dealing a floating action button. So those pieces for here. If you wanted a floating action button, all you have to do is check the little box. It'll put it in here. You can configure it by choosing all of your icons. Again, makes your life a little bit easier for you to do that. And I'm just going to push OK. Now by default, as you can see, when it creates this, it drops all kinds of stuff in here, and we're going to actually delete some of those pieces because we don't need it. For example, I don't really care to have a collapsing toolbar layout because I didn't check that box. In fact, it shouldn't have put it there. I don't know why I did, but we're going to just nuke it because we don't want to have this thing collapse, i.e. shrink as the user scrolls. We want it to just be small to begin with. And we're going to change our height now to wrap content as well. Width, match the parent. Our height, wrap the content. I'm going to have to go back. Maybe I did check that box. Maybe I screwed up. But we also want to set now a couple of extra pieces. So we want to do a theme. Let's do @style. You'll notice when we do our hints here, there's lots of different options here. Anything that's the @style, I can choose, those are ones that I've defined, for example, like with my app theme, or I can choose ones that Android provides. I'm going to choose, let's do theme overlay. Oops. Helps if I spell it right. @style. / theme overlay .app compat .dark .action bar. And as what I'm telling it here is when you're styling this app bar here, make it dark so that it looks like an action bar. So that way it'll set the appropriate background colors, appropriate foreground colors for our toolbar here. You can define your own theme that inherits from this if you want to make it a shortcut. I've seen people that do that as well. So we want to define those basic pieces. We should also probably provide a pop-up theme. It helps when I put my cursor in the right place. I'm used to being self-closing tags. So there we go. We want to do a pop-up theme. And for this app, the pop-up theme is when inflating pop-up menus, i.e. like if I had an overflow menu or something like that. I don't want them to be dark like my action bar theme is. I would want them to be light. So it makes sense in that case to do an app compat light. Because what that's going to do now is if our toolbox, for example, if we have an overflow or some other pop-up menu that needs to be generated, that'll be doing it with a different theme. So you can control your theming now to just control what things look like. Oftentimes, finding the appropriate theme that you need and then rolling with one that's built in is generally the easiest way to go. You can define custom themes. I've got some links to get into the weeds there if you're interested. We don't need to go way deep into that because that's a fairly advanced topic. But again, just kind of give you the basic pieces that you need to get started. So we have an app bar, we have a toolbar. And then if we wanted to have, so for example, our content be scrollable, then we would use a nested scroll view. However, for our thing here, we don't need to have a whole bunch of scrolling going on. So I am going to take all of this and make it go away. Because really what we're going to only have a few pieces in here, so a linear layout makes a lot of sense to be able to just have those few pieces. My width can match my parent, but my height should wrap my content, and orientation should be vertical. This will allow me to drop in those pieces. And again, let's use the design view for those text input layouts, and we'll drop them in here. And I'm going to drop a couple of those. Oops. Does that to me every time. Drives me nuts. Oh, we'll just copy and paste. Okay, this will allow us to, oops, again, maybe I should check before I copy paste. We want to set our height to wrap content, otherwise we'll only ever get one on there for our layout. Our hint, we could change this guy to first name, and then extract that guy out. Alt-Enter, extract it, first name. And now let's copy that down. And with this time we want last name. Extract that out. Oops. And let's do one more for email address. And extract that. Boom. Okay, we also want to give some IDs here so we can access these pieces. So ID, oops, EDT first, ID, EDT last. Oops, put that one in the wrong place. Let's drag that guy down. We want on the text. And again, let's do one more. ID, EDT, email. Okay, so we've got as you can see in the layout now, a first name, a last name, and email. So we get all of those pieces to show up for our content there. And that gives us the basic pieces that we want to have happen here for this guy. The only other thing we want to change here now is we want this to be full screen. So we want to make sure we set this height here on this one. Make sure that is a match parent. Otherwise, it won't all fit the way you want it to fit. I think let's actually do one last thing before we walk away from this guy for a second. Let's go ahead and set now a background color for this guy. This is a good chance for us to see that too. And let's go ahead and set that to our, let's do attribute color primary for our toolbar. One other thing though to keep in mind too when we do this, by default this guy is going to be transparent, our linear layout here. So let's, in addition to an orientation, let's give him a background as well of just white. So white, solid Fs. Okay, you can also apply paddings and all those other pieces if you want, but this will give us the guts of what we need to have functioning here. Is that dialogue. So let's go back now to our logic. We don't really have a whole lot of going on here. We need to create a couple of methods. So let's go ahead and override some of these methods. We want to generate and on create view. First off, so in our on create view, let's do like we've done in the past. Now let's set a private view root, so we've got something to work with. And let's make that guy go away. We don't want him. So our root equals inflator dot inflate, and we want it to inflate our dot layout dot what did we call that guy? Dialog new user. Pass it the container that comes in, the parent, just as we did before, and don't attach it to roots to the root. There we go. Simple, clean. Got our dialog new user working again. Let's add a return so we don't forget to return our root. Okay. And now this is where we're going to start to make our dialog box be full screen. Okay, because again, we've already defined that there was a toolbar there, so we need to get access to that toolbar and tell it to treat it like a toolbar. So we need a toolbar. Let's call this guy toolbar equals and then root.find view by ID r.id.toolbar. So find the toolbar of this guy. We can then set a title of it if we want, toolbar.setTitle. And whatever we want our dialog title to be, new user. And then now we need to tell Android to use this toolbar as an actual toolbar. Okay, so we need access to our activity, which we can do via get activity. Okay, however, we need it to be an app compat activity so that we can set a support toolbar. So we got to cast this guy to an app compat activity. Okay, notice I put parentheses around that whole statement so that I can call a method on this case, or set support action bar, and pass it our toolbar on the result of what we just did. Okay, now if you're getting an error message like this, it's complaining that the toolbar doesn't work. Okay, if we come up here again, it means it's imported the wrong toolbar, so we're going to get rid of it and import the support toolbar. Okay, happens a lot in Android. The Android team is working hard on some things to get rid of those issues like that. So in the future, hopefully that will become less of a problem. But for now, it is what it is. So that allows us to set our action bar for us. So now we've set the action bar. Now we need to get the action bar. So rather than a toolbar, we want an action bar now. So let's call action bar action bar. And then again, we want to get the app compat activity. Oops. Equals dot get support action bar. That way we can, once we have access to the support action bar, now we can make it look like a full screen dialog box. Because that's where we're going to set things, for example, is having this X take place. That is something we need, that the action bar is in charge of, so we need to tell the action bar to treat it as such. So we can say, as long as we got an action bar back, action bar is not null. Let's set a couple of behaviors. So let's tell our action bar to set display home as up enabled to true. Okay. Typically, as you do that by default, that would put an arrow here, I should say, sorry, an up arrow. But as we noted down here below, we have to avoid anything other than an X, because an up arrow indicates things would be saved, but that's not the case. If they hit the X, it's going to be abandoned. So we need to now, after we've set it, we need to tell it to use it that it's going to be treated as a home button. Set home button, enabled as true. And then we want to set a home as up indicator, and we'll want to give it a drawable. In this case, we want that X. So Android provides that for us, but it ships with the operating system, so we don't need to re-import it. Android.r.drawable.ic menu. Menu. Close, clear, cancel. Because that's what it's used for, is to close something, to clear something, or to cancel something. Okay, that will set our little X here in the top left corner. The other thing we want to do is we want to be able to have an options menu, so we have to tell it that this fragment is going to implement an options menu. So we're going to need to be able to, it's going to need to call our onCreate options menu so we can inflate it and all of those other behaviors. And the nice thing by now is having the fragment set these pieces is when we dismiss this dialog, it will then also reset the menus back to what was previously there. So we don't have to try to manage any of that. We can let the operating system manage those pieces for us. Last thing we need to do as we create this view is we need to get references to our first, last, and our email addresses. Or email field. So EDT email, for example, is going to be from within. We want text input edit text from root.find view by ID. We want r.id.edt email. And we're going to rinse, lather, and repeat. So I'm going to break one of the first rules of programming. Oops. And we're going to copy paste and change this to edt first. And here's, well, edt. Oops, not edt first and edt last. edt last. So we have references to our email field, our first field, and our last field, so that when later on the user presses save, for example, I can insert those into the database. Okay. Now, so far everything's been pretty similar to the fragment. Now we need to implement the dialog side. So as you remember, as a dialog side, we had a method we needed to override called onCreateDialog. So let's generate override onCreateDialog. Okay. And so in this particular method, rather than returning, we're going to store the dialog created by the super. So we can do something with it that you'll see here in a second. Sorry, I'm OCD about my stuff lining up properly. Okay, and we'll return that dialog. But what we're going to ask for in this guy is we're going to make a request of the operating system, and a new thing called request window feature. Specifically, we are going to ask that feature no title. Meaning, don't do the default thing you do with a dialog and give me a title, because I've already done that title as part of my toolbar for my action bar. So I've already taken care of the title thing, so don't give me a title. Okay? So now we have a dialog that's created. We've set it up as a full screen dialog. Now we just need to do some of those basic things, for example, like set up our options menu. So we need to come in and let's make a new menu for this guy. Let's call this new menu resource file. I'm going to call this menu create dialog, because that's what it's really going to be. And our menu create dialog is going to be a pretty simple thing. We only really need one menu item in this guy. And our menu item, its title is going to be save. We give it an ID, action save, because again we preface those by action typically. And then show as action as always. We always want that to be there. Now, if we want to put an icon there instead of the text icon, we would come in and create a drawable and choose a new vector asset. Let's choose this guy to save. we want it to be white. And save. Instead of black, let's change that guy now to white. Next, finish. And our icon is at drawable slash apparently hasn't finished rendering or running yet, so IC save white 24 DP. Okay. Or if you prefer not to use an icon for it and you want it just to say the word text, is I've got in the sample shots for your homework assignment, that's acceptable as well. I don't care which way you go, icon or text, either one is acceptable to me. So now that we have a menu for us to work with, we now need to tell it to inflate that options menu. So we're going to come again and generate, and we're going to override, and in this case we want on create options menu. But because a menu already exists from the previous, we want to clear it for this guy because we don't want to append our menu behaviors. We want to erase them because this guy is a full screen. So we want it to take over what we have here in the menu. Now this is going to be one of those few times when we're not going to actually call a super because we're trying to do something different outside the normal. So in our activity, give us the menu inflator and actually inflate a completely new menu. r.menu create dialog and pass it the menu that we got here. Okay. There we go. My Android Studio is being stupid. I had to run a clean again to get that to show up again. So we have an options menu. I mean, again, nothing new. Stuff that we've done several times in the past. So now we just need to implement now the actual menu itself. So let's generate, override, and now we want to do on options item selected. Okay. So let's again, we can now do a series of ifs. Personally, I like to do a switch. That makes most sense to me, is to ask for the item and give me its ID, and then just do a simple switch on each of those cases. Taking this guy, and let's drop him into the default case. So in the case that the user picked r.id.action save, what do we want to have happen? Well, when the user saves things, now this is where we want to take the contents of our dialog and drop them into our database. So as we've done in the past, let's make a new anonymous class for our thread. Let's make a new thread of a runnable. And let's go add our .start lest we forget. And what do we want it to do? Well, we want to say app database, give me the instance, and it needs a context to work with. So using my DAO, go ahead and insert. Well, what do I want you to insert? Well, we want to insert a user, so let's create an object to represent our user. Equals new. Might have to import that guy. New user. And it needs the first name, the last name, and the email address. So edt first dot, do you remember? Get text dot to string. Do the same thing now. edt last dot get text dot to string. edt email dot give me the get text dot to string. And then let's insert that user. So now when the user clicks save, we'll go ahead and insert that guy and save it in the database. However, once we're done saving that in the database, or at least we've kicked the data off to our thread and it's working, we don't need it anymore. Now we want to make our dialog go away. So in that case, let's just say dismiss. Now also, if the user clicks that little X up in that top corner, if they click this icon right here, that's also treated as a menu option. It uses an Android ID in this case though, so we're going to say case android.r.id.home. So if they press home, then just go away and return true, because everything's been dealt with. Okay, so pretty simple thing, except we missed our return true up here. Then we don't even need a break because we've handled everything. That's a better way to go. So we've told it that it's been dealt with, otherwise let the menu figure it out. So now, all we need to do is connect these pieces together so that when the user, I missed a semicolon there. So now, when my user presses save, that'll pull up and save, but the thing I haven't done yet now is make this dialog box come up in the first place, which that now is going to belong inside of our activity. So inside of main activity, right now, we had a thread. Before, we had a snack bar. We don't want either of those to happen here. So inside of our activity now, let's take this guy, and we need to now bring up that dialog fragment. So we need a fragment manager, because it's a dialog fragment. Again, making sure it brought in the right fragment manager, which it didn't. So we want to get rid of that one, and let's bring it in again. And let's change that to the support fragment manager. Fragment manager, I'm going to just call mine FM because I'm feeling lazy. Give me the support fragment manager. I now need a new user dialog fragment that I'm going to construct. I'm going to call mine dialog equals new user dialog fragment. Construct me a fragment to work with. And now let's get ourselves a transaction to work with. So fragment manager, so we called fm dot begin transaction. Inside of my transaction, we can do a couple of things here if we want. Like, for example, we can add. Well, I want to add. And now, here's where things get a little bit different. Because again, I don't have somewhere to stick this thing. Because it's taking over the entire screen. I'm not injecting it as a container. So we need to reach out to the operating system. So android.r.id.content. Because I want to put this guy as the main content of my activity. And then we'll pass it the dialog. We can then, for example, add it to the backstack. Add a backstack, null, and commit. Now, also, it's pretty common in a case like this, especially with full screen transactions, and now we're getting a little bit further into Android. You don't have to do this piece, but it's nice to add a transition. A transition is just an animation that takes place to make things feel more natural. There's one that we can use here called under fragment transaction dot transit fragment open. Oops. So now it'll give us a nice little animation of the track, so it'll make sense that the fragment opened up. We will add it as the root content, because again it's taking over everything. That's why we also had to add that white background. And then we will add it to our backstack and go ahead and commit that guy now. So our transaction will take place. However, the last thing that kind of bugs me, just because I'm OCD a little bit sometimes, is if we go to our activity main and we look at the design view of our fab, it's taken, I don't know, let's see. It's being silly. Something's not rendering properly. If we look at our fab, it's using a dialog for an email address, which, or for an email icon, which is kind of stupid to have an email icon here. It would make more sense if we had something like an add button instead. So we can come in and we could find one inside of Android, like for example input add. If you wanted to do that, it's green. I don't really like input add, but it's an easy one you can chuck in there to do an input add. Personally, when I'm generating apps, I come into Drawable and make another vector asset, and I use the material design icon for add. Right there. There it is. I'm going to make mine white again. Let's call this icy white. And we'll add that guy in. And so now, instead of at Android : drawable, I'm just going to say at drawable icy add white 24 dp. So now my icon will be an add button. Again, not a critical thing or a save, whatever icon you want to put there, you want to make it look decent, right? So now let's let this thing build. I'll pause it while it builds so you guys don't have to stare at that. Alright, our build's complete. Now we can go ahead. We've got our floating action button here. We can trigger it. Now you'll notice we have a couple of small issues here, and I left these here so we could talk about some important things. So first off, if you look at it, it's not actually taking over the whole screen. We have our save button, we have our close, and those work properly. And our transition comes in. Notice that little subtle animation when it comes in. Woo, pretty. But it doesn't take the whole screen. Now I left this here so that I could show you a tool in Android Studio. When you're getting weird issues like this with your layout, if you come up to Tools, there's something called the Layout Inspector. This little icon right here. You can choose your application, and it'll take a snapshot of your device that you're running on right now. You'll see it down here. It says Capturing View Hierarchy. And what that's going to do is it's going to reach out to the device and get the computed view of everything on the screen. And you can do this with any app that's running, honestly. If you want to figure out how somebody's done some fancy layout, you can go in and capture it. And you're going to get, wow, I've never gotten an error message from it before. That's fun. Let's try it one more time. My Android Studio keeps glitching. As you guys have seen, I've had to clean like 4 times during this video. If our layout inspector doesn't show it, if it keeps crashing, I'll just show you what the issue is because I left it there on purpose. Something's going wrong with my Android. So anyways, but our issue is our full screen dialog is building out the dialog, but because we're overriding all of the content, I need to now make my content itself be the whole screen. So that linear layout where I'm putting the guts, all of that white, the white portion where I set the background here, this guy I actually need to set its height to match the parent as well, so that it takes up that whole space available to it, not just the lines that it needs to generate those 3 pieces. So now we run it, we can see now it takes over the full screen. We still have a couple of issues. Specifically, our first name is actually underneath our toolbar now. That's a new problem we haven't had yet, and I'll walk you through that. So we got to get this guy to scoot down a little bit so we're not overriding our first name. So the way we get rid of this one that I read, and the reason I left this here is because you guys will run into this. It's a strange glitch with a coordinator layout, which is the root of our main activity. It should only trigger when you have, and it's probably because we have a recycler view on it, because when you have something that's capable of scrolling, things trigger a little bit differently with a coordinator layout. So we actually need to tell it that the coordinator layout itself, that this guy is supposed to be full screen by specifying a layout behavior. So we specify layout behavior. And this one is going to look a little funny for you, the way we define this. Okay, our layout behavior is defined by a string resource that you can't actually see. It's one that's built by Gradle in the background called, you'll see it here, string/appbar underscore scrolling underscore view underscore behavior. Because we have an app bar here, we've got to tell it the coordinator layout to scoot everything down and make space, and to treat it as if it were a scrolling view. And the only reason we have to set it as a scrolling view is, again, it's a glitch because we have a recycler view on the screen. In theory, we shouldn't have to do that, but I find I almost have to do it almost every time, even if I don't necessarily have like a recycler view on the screen. It's just a weird little quirk. The Android team's aware of it. I know I've complained about it several times, and at some point they'll probably get around to fixing it, but they've got a lot going on to deal with. So we're going to let this guy go and hit play. Boom. We can set a first name. Let's say John Wayne. John at Wayne.com. And we choose save. Boom. And there's John Wayne. Notice he showed up automatically. We didn't have to do anything to put him into our recycler view. He was there already because we used that live data so that it noted when there was a change to our user table and automatically updated the recycler view as appropriate. So we can then keep adding things, as many as we want, and it would just continue to build out our list from there. So again, this covered a lot of ground this week. So normally I don't put up full source code because there's a lot of benefit for you guys in the learning that comes. In fact, industry's asked us to really kind of push you guys to be able to watch and see something like this, and then to be able to type it out and figure it out on your own. But I feel like this week there was just so many moving pieces to make these last parts start to come together now that we're really starting to get to the end of the heavy material we're going to cover this semester. I'm going to zip up my project here so you can see it functioning and play with it the same way it is here at the end of this video today. And as always, make sure as you get questions, don't just get stuck. You know that you and your teammates, or your classmates rather, there's so much benefit that comes when you are helping solve problems. So as you're getting stuck, don't be afraid to throw it out there on the discussion forum. Let's work together. Let's solve these problems. Let's see where you're getting stuck and help each other out, rather than just trying to inevitably go down some squirrel on Stack Overflow that's not going to really get you to a place where you need to go. You guys don't just have enough experience yet to really know good answer from terrible answer on Stack Overflow or other Google resources. So let's reach out and help each other out this week, and we'll see you guys online.